first of all, the last time I wore this, I was getting married. So I just realized it. And that was quite a while ago. And I was just listening to some of the comments, and you did give an address. And I wanted to thank Professor Chandra. Thank you, Professor Baital, for the introduction. I think there are a couple of points that were made. I actually got quite engrossed in the points that were being made. It would be a very fitting summary for many of the things I hope to point to. But the notion of transformation really hit me in a couple of things. And I don't want to pick on the old dog learning tricks thing, because we do also talk about on the internet, nobody knowing you're a dog, because it's all out there. But the notion of transformation, the significance of events like this, and I am very big on events like this, because not only to celebrate what is core to academic institutions, teaching and learning, but as Professor Chandra was pointing out, there are moments of reflection. Say, look, what have we been up to? And it's that kind of loop that keeps us generative and keeps us growing in the face of so many changes. The notion of transformation is important, and there's a bit of my background that I think I should mention, not to add to the very lengthy and laudatory remarks that were made. My doctoral work was at a program called Future Studies in Education. And, I came from a background in engineering and industrial management and so on. And in our Future Studies program, we were not into forecasting. What we talked about was our capability to generate preferred futures for others. And so the idea was actually to take stock of the affordances that, and resources that were available to us, to have some sense of what would preferred futures for education look like. And in fact, my journey into education technology came in because of thinking about technology, providing some agency, some new kinds of capabilities that will allow us to think differently about education, about quality, about access. In fact, I will tell you that the first 1.5 years of my doctoral work, we were largely studying Freud and Marx and sexism and feminism and racism in education, and saying how can we change these structures for preferred futures in education. And then, there were lots of things happening with microcomputers, and Apple was still, a twinkle in somebody's eye. And we were writing to people and saying, give us computers so that we can talk to teachers, talk to local people, and start thinking about the possibilities. Similarly, my journey into open education was really looking at this force that was all around us, the force of openness, and saying, look, this has some very, very transformative possibilities for education in the large. In fact, just around the time when OpenCourseWare was launched, and I'll say more about that, there were lots of open education initiatives sprouting, and a couple of us, a colleague of mine called Toru Yoshi, who's now teaching at the University of Kyoto, he and I compiled a book supported by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning called Opening Up Education. And essentially, we looked at all these initiatives that were sprouting, OpenCourseWare, Open Learning Initiative, the UK's Open University, and said, look, there's something going on over here. And all these initiatives by themselves are interesting, but we should step back and look at the collective difference that they can make for education. And we had 29 authors who offered their reflections, and our only marching orders to the authors were, look, we don't want to hear about your individual programs. We know about that. You might make a reference to that. We really want you to step back and reflect on how these things can make a collective difference to education. That's a plug about the book. You can actually go look it up. It's available for Walking the Talk. It's available for free as a download. If you just Google Opening Up Education, you'll see that. You can look at that. Anyway, so the transformation notion is very, very important. And at MIT, we are at a tremendous moment here. Vice Chancellor Chandra was talking about, us transforming. Microsoft used to have this term called eating your own dog food, more on the dog. But the thing is, our ability to influence transformation elsewhere I think, requires that we are willing and able to transform ourselves. And so we are at a very interesting moment in MIT where we are looking at the centrality of all these things called digital education or digital affordances. And our president has gone out and said, look, in 5 years, MIT education is going to look nothing like what it looks now. And we're putting in motion things like this, And, that for large institutions, especially very, very research-bound institutions, that's not an insignificant statement to make. We are really going to change dramatically. So we launched 3 task forces, and this was not part of my prepared text, but when I was, last night when I was chatting with the Vice Chancellor, I thought it was important to mention that as part of this transformation exercise that we have launched at MIT, there are 3 task forces that have been set up. One which is looking at residential education in the large, the second which is looking at global implications, global education, bidirectionally. What can MIT do to influence education outside? What can we learn from the world outside to change education over here? And one of the things it recognizes is how much more permeability there is between the inside and the outside now, between higher education, community colleges, higher education, K through 12, industry, higher education, and so that porosity is a factor that we have to think about, and that porosity is really enabled very, very heavily by network, digital technologies, open education, so looking at, so there's one, and I actually served on that task force, and the report, by the way, is out, and it's quite a profound report on change. And then saying that, look, all this means that it's not business as usual. You really have to think about how do you run the business of education. So there is one task force that has devoted its energies over there. So these are very transformation-inducing times, and at least I can tell you that MIT, we are trying to take stock of it in pretty significant and substantial ways. So, and some of us, everybody has been talking about MOOCs and massive open online courses and edX. I'm going to come back to this a lot, but I really want you to look at the second part, which is really saying, look, all the stuff about change and transformation is because it allows us to think and do differently and better what we believe is our core business, which is around teaching and learning. This is an opportunity to think about how we might teach differently, how we might address audiences whom we have not addressed or adequately hitherto. How might we improve learning gains? So both at a micro level and at a macro level, it's about changing teaching and learning practices. And that's something that I'll say as a general statement. We've all, when I started my, after my industrial management, we all wanted to be systems analysts, and you would go. And at that time in India, I remember, there was a big new push towards automation. Everybody wanted to automate their accounting system, and because the computers were there. And we'd go, so the first thing to do in any automation or this kind of a system is you go and study the original system, right, and see what's going on. And I will go out and say that the only consistent benefit that technology offers for any system, including education, is the opportunity to take a good look at what you're doing in the first place. What are you doing? Why are you doing? Who are you serving? And then seeing, where there are improvements possible. Because in many, otherwise, there is a more than good chance that you're going to be cloning inadequacy. Because, technology can have a great multiplier effect. And I was telling you about this too. I'm not sure if it's the appropriate moment to tell the story, but at some point, I will. Oh, what the hell! I will. So it's a good thing to wake up to and warm up to. But I was remembering yesterday that in my early days in the U.S., after I had gone to work in Maine at the University of Maine system. It's a 7-campus system, and I used to work in one of the small campuses. It was like an extension school, and was writing and developing a proposal for interactive telecommunication amongst the 7 campuses. Now, Maine is a hard state, a lot of poverty, geographically challenged, And in the campus that we were on, 76% of the students were non-traditionally aged women. So it was a classic case for interactive telecommunications. And a bunch of us, led by one of the presidents who was a real champion, used to go from campus to campus to evangelize this to our presidents. So Fred was a president of my small campus, and I said, Fred, this will be an excellent thing for us. We won't need a French teacher. We can use the one from Presque Isle. We won't need this. And, our women students can come more, have access to education, all the case. And Fred said, yes, you're right. And but remember what you told me about Jim X. I'm saying X to preserve this gentleman's anonymity. But Jim used to teach history. And luck of the draw, he had this dreaded post-lunch 1 o'clock class. Right? So 3 days a week, I'd go by Jim's class. Jim used to be talking to his atlas. And there'd be about 40 students sort of dozing off, post-lunch class. So Fred says, well, if Jim can do that to 40 students in a class, imagine what he could do over a statewide network. So there's a good, so you can, so you really have to think about what you're doing so that you're not cloning this. Anyway, so we've had I've been here at MIT for 18 years. We do a lot of educational technology we have done for various purposes, and I want to point out some key messages today. I want to give you glimpses of some of those things that made for transformation over the years and how there have been some invading across all these applications of our journey. When I came into MIT, I inherited something called Project Athena, which was a partnership between MIT and Digital Equipment Corporation and IBM. And it was to put out high-powered workstations and a distributed network and lots of courseware with the assumption that if you gave students great computational horsepower, good things could happen for education. A lot of things came out of that, X Windows, Kerberos, et cetera, et cetera. That was then. Later on, there was a Council on Education Technology, which was doing a lot of visioning exercises. So if you look at the journey with the technology, there were different kinds of things responding to to new opportunities in technology, but also responding to new prerogatives for education. But again, like I said, there'll be some central themes. And if you look at these, and I'm going to describe some of these, give you a glimpse of them in the course of this talk. Teal, for instance, was an active learning studio physics exercise, and I'll say more about that. It was really to see about how you can bring active learning to large lectures. There are mathlets, simulations, visualizations, to make sure that students understand math concepts and understand the relevance to other subjects and also to what goes on in practice to bring more authentic learning. We have iLab, which I'll talk about, which is like a remote lab for distance learning, for remote learning. We have Math CI was a very interesting thing where math faculty had to bring in communication-intensive requirements in the math courses. And they said, how can we have, because MIT said, our students don't know how to communicate well, we need to have communication-intensive requirement. And the math faculty were wondering what to do. Some of them had ideas. And all we did was, I had one of my groups who created, just using WordPress, a collaboration site where faculty could share experiences, lesson plans, lectures, and how they were bringing communication-intensive requirements in math courses. It became a big force, and it became very, very popular and very useful, so much so that we wrote to the National Science Foundation and says, look, there are other pedagogies, like studio physics or for project-based learning that our faculty are engaged in, and they need to be able to share their experiences, because unless we support community adoption of these kinds of innovative practices live and die with the individual faculty member who first initiated them. And so the point, however, over here is that when we talk about education technology, it's a generous definition of education technology. It is not just about how do I get learning gains for math learning. Sometimes it's to create communities for sharing innovative practices. Sometimes, like OpenCourseFed, it is used to create a platform for sharing our courses with the world. So then sometimes it's to make sure that you configure spaces well for teaching and learning. There's one story I like to tell where we had a project-based class. And MIT is very big on trying to bring research experiences to to undergraduate education. You want your students to feel like researchers. So we took a computing cluster, ripped out most of the computers. This was a project-based learning, a freshman course, and the project was around drug discovery, not the 60s kind, and what we did was we took away some of the computers, put microscopes for tabletop microscopy. We put in some couches where students could engage with each other to talk about, as researchers, some video conferencing equipment so that they could confer with people elsewhere. And it was very powerful. And I'll tell you, here is the proof of that experience. At the end of the first year, right? Like I said, this is a project-based learning course on drug discovery. Freshmen, at the end of the first year, 3 students from that class filed for patents. I mean, so they actually felt, acted, and behaved like researchers. So that's another kind of way in which you think about technology. And central, if you might have already seen that a large part of what's happening is that you really want to bring active learning kinds of things, research kinds of things. I'll keep on hopping on that because that's a very, very central educational value proposition at MIT. So we want to make sure that when technology is applied, it foregrounds that, advances that, amplifies that, extends that. So that's the thing. Then, so our general strategy has been around, how can we bring innovative practices for these? How do you make powerful tools available and make them very, very widely accessible to students? And then remembering that when these innovations need to, and we had an excellent conversation last night about sustaining innovations. How do you move these innovations to make sure that they become part of mainstream education? So they have to start influencing the infrastructure development. So I can tell you, when wireless was deployed at MIT, we first deployed them, and I remember because I negotiated with Avaya, etc. Those days I was in central IT, to make sure that the first set of hotspots were where collaborative student learning activity was happening. So your infrastructure, the kinds of technology you put in place, is driven by the educational prerogatives. So that, and so our strategy was to make sure that these kinds of small experiments that faculty might be doing became large institutional experiments, and the large institutional experiments started driving, sometimes in an anticipatory way, how the infrastructure of the institute should evolve, how should it connect, and then also take advantage, because I mentioned this Project Athena. When we started, we were buying very, very expensive workstations from Sun because they had to be configured like that. Within the first 3-4 years that I was there, the commodity market was picking up. A lot of the functionality that we're building was available cheap outside. So you have to start, rethinking, or you have to have a year out to see, or an eye out to see how technology is evolving, what kinds of, nowadays everybody talks about the cloud. A lot of the services that we provide, can be provided up there, caveat issues of privacy and security and so on. So that's a general strategy. But whenever we did these initiatives, we kept thinking about what are our core values. By the way, this set of core values was generated when we did MIT OpenCourseware. Now, Professor Chandra made a reference to OpenCourseware, and I have to tell you, the announcement, impactful and earth-shattering as it was preceded by a lot of confusion, murkiness, discussion at MIT, we also were working with consultants, McKinsey and Buzal and Hamilton, and all of which led to the generation of some of these core values. What was happening at that time was that there were various open initiatives, the various online content.com kinds of initiatives that were being launched by various universities. Columbia University was launching something called Fathom. Stanford and Chicago were doing something called Unext. And our president, the late Chuck West, and the pro was Bob Brown, my old boss. So they said, look, folks, have you missed the boat? Has the train left the station? Those folks are doing all that. What are we doing in order to respond to the opportunities that the internet presents? And, we discussed and says, well, the Council on Education Technology, and in the faculty committees, we were talking about it. And till we came to a point and said, look, if we have to respond to that question, we really have to think about what is the essential value proposition of education at MIT. What constitutes excellence over here? So big conversations, discussion at MIT. We use words like intensity, intensity. MIT education is about intensity. So yeah, and then people said, oh, MIT education, it's like drinking from the fire hose. A lot of stuff. And we said, yeah, what does that mean? What does that mean? Till we were able to articulate that the real essential quality of excellence at MIT is a very high bandwidth of interaction between great students and great faculty. Okay, and a lot of hands-on experiences and bringing research experiences into undergraduate work. And once you were able to say that, and at that time, mind you, this was 2000, okay, we said the only way we know how to do that is what sounds like face-to-face education, on-site education, which is why we took a picture of that. We said the only way what we can do with the internet is say that this is the quality of excellence over here. We can share that. We'll take a picture of that and put it out there, and that's OpenCourseWare. So if you look at it, we used to have a lot of disclaimers in OpenCourseWare saying this is not an MIT education, it is a window to MIT education, it is a publishing of MIT courses, but that's not MIT education. We put it out there because it said our real core values are these, right? And these core values have been reflected in all the education technology, at least the significant education technology initiatives that we have launched. There are some of these that I have mentioned over here. There was reference made to iCampus, which was our partnership with Microsoft Research. And at different points at times, they would be articulated slightly different. But what was essential, some of these promoting active learning, the commons of the mind, new modes of interinstitutional collaboration, these kinds of things will keep on representing themselves, and we would build our education technology and our infrastructure to support these values. So here we are. We had said that a big core value is this high bandwidth of interaction between great students and great faculty. And we say that and we said, well, you look at this and, oh, by the way, this active learning is represented. This is an origami from an origami competition. And what you see is the worker with a hammer on the anvil and a scholar with a book. And this is actually reflected in MIT's logo. So so MIT's value is around mind and hand, doing and thinking. So it's a very hands-on place. So building, active learning, this is in the DNA of MIT. Everything that it's not looking at engineering as a separate thing, but engineering is very, very core to science education. So building, doing is what characterizes difference, and that's reflected over there. So we said, oh, active learning, interaction is very big. But then we had this physics class. Okay, this is an introductory physics class, and which every MIT student has to. We have something called the General Institute requirements. Right? Every MIT has to take, and it's a tough physics class. I can tell you it is tough, and I did physics in good places in India too, and they teach electromagnetism as an introductory course, and it's 600 people sitting in a lecture hall like this. Tiered classes, not even a lecture hall like this, because you don't have these aisles to move. It's just one long thing. And we said, there's John Belcher who's talking to 600 students. How does our noble intent of having high interaction between students and faculty play out in the 600 student lecture class? So what we did, and by the way, we borrowed the idea from people like Jack Wilson, who was at Rensselaer Polytechnic, people in South Carolina who are doing this, and brought it over here, the MIT version, and said, let's take this class. You have to deal with 600 students, but let's turn that into an active studio-based physics class, right? So we have this large lecture hall, not large room, round tables, actual projects that students are working on over here. Right? This is, by the way, Professor John Belcher, who was the creator of Teal. Right? He's a physics professor. He's a space scientist. And so people actually do these electromagnetism experiments. They discuss, and the faculty member weaves in and out doing the lecture. So it's lecture interwoven with hands-on experience with stuff that you're doing. So what we did was we took technology, brought in technology, laptops. You have wonderful visualizations for electromagnetism, understanding fields, etc., all around the room, so people can understand. You will see that in the screens behind like that. And so the idea is to bring technology so that you preserve the efficiency of dealing with 400, 600 students, because you have to teach 600 students. It's an imperfect class, without sacrificing the efficacy that comes in from small group and hands-on learning experiences. So again, this is how technology plays out. So there are project-based learning courses involving for design experiments, all following the same principle. And accordingly, software was built for peer review of designs, etc. So once we were clear that this is the kind of experiences we want to promote, active learning, you have software built like that. Your students build software. In fact, the peer-to-peer assessment tool was something that our faculty and students created. And you start configuring your infrastructure and your learning practices accordingly. We are showing that right now. In fact, we have this wonderful world of visualizations. This is in fact, I'll have one of my colleagues talk about it in a video clip. We are creating a lot of visualizations and simulations. And by the way, you can go to that. There should be a site there. If you go star.mit.edu, one of these things called Star Biochem is a visualization program that has about 400,000 downloads. It's openly available. And students go grab a DNA molecule, they interact with it, they reach into Cornell's open protein database, they make comparisons, and it is all browser-based access. They do not have to be computer scientists to do that, because the intent is to teach biology concepts or genetics concepts. In fact, I might just play. Let's see if it just comes on. This is a quick clip because my colleague Lourdes talks about this. And what you'll notice...
Star Biochem's user interface visually represents protein structural information based on the 4 levels of protein structure. For example, we can select quaternary and click on chain to better differentiate the human DNA repair protein and the segment of DNA to which it's bound. All helices, sheets, and coils within this protein can be visually represented by clicking on all ribbons within the secondary window. To visualize only one of these structures, one can click on track selection and the particular structure of interest. Let's take a closer look at helix 16. First, let's visualize the atoms present within this structure. Second, let's highlight only 16 by obscuring the rest of the protein. To see only the side chains of the amino acids within this helix, move the backbone slider to the left. To highlight only the backbone of the helix, repeat the step within the side chain slider. Now let's explore how this protein interacts with the substrate. To do this, first, let's select a DNA substrate within PBD tree. Second, we will obscure the protein to highlight the selected DNA substrate by moving the unselected scroll bar to the left until the protein is partially transparent. Now we can see how this protein flips out a DNA base from the double helix to check for mutations as it travels along the DNA, giving us a snapshot of how the structure of this protein relates to its function.
Anyway, so the point over here is not to give you a genetics lesson for 3 credits, which is, but there are a couple of points over there. This is becoming available as part of all the introductory biology courses that are going to be on edX online, right? So one of the things you'll notice, it keeps talking about selective viewing. You go grab the molecule, you selectively view. So this is not about showing pretty pictures and eye candy. It is about creating interactive experiences for the students. We use the same program with middle school students, again, browser-based access. So there's some amount of investment in developing these because we work with our faculty members. It took 1.5 years, and there are stories about innovation over here because there were points where I had to hide this effort because it's very difficult to talk about the output of something. It's the expression making hot dog. So, when you look at it, it looks all messy till you see the final product. So there's a lot of that going on. But the part is you create it so that the power of and this control of empowering the learner and being able to do it online, doing it with lots of people around the world, is there without them having to be expert computer scientists or having to know Unix or C++ or whatever. It's that kind of thing. And like I said, there are one of the things that we've seen with these downloads is that people create their own lessons around them. We have our faculty who create the lessons around the visualization. Teachers who download it in different countries, they create their own lessons around it. That also becomes available. This is another example. This is more in the nature of show-off. Violeta Ivanova, she's a colleague of mine. She developed this for teaching aeronautics. The astronaut, that's a female astronaut. The idea is, and I don't want to get into too much arcane science over here, but this is to teach aspects of conservation of angular momentum in microgravity. So people are there in space. How does momentum play itself out over there? So it's a whole interactive visualization that's been created. So these are the kinds. This was a phenomenal program, and all of this is to say that we want students to be very, very actively engaged in their educational process through technology, whether it is on-site or whether it is online. And each one of the applications that I'm showing you has hitherto been used in the classes and also used with remote learners. And now in our current incarnation, it's being used in blended fashions. This was a remarkable program. Shigeru Miyagawa, who actually used to chair the open courseware advisory at MIT, Shigeru and John Dower, who's a famous Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, they created this program called Visualizing Cultures. And the idea was to teach students Japanese language and culture through images. And some of these images were in the Hiroshima Museum. Some of them were in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Some of them were in Shigeru's computer. And what we created was applications based on the open architecture, so that students could seamlessly bring these images and compose narratives in order to interact with them. One of the interesting things about this Visualizing Cultures is this was based on Commodore Perry. Who, Commodore Perry used to make, from the US, used to make a lot of excursions into Japan. And so the Japanese people, depending on the relationship that the US had with Japan, used to paint Commodore Perry in different ways. So when the relationship was very good with the US, Commodore Perry was portrayed as this magnanimous, nice guy. And then when there were real hard times between the US and Japan, and many of you know it was pretty ugly. And at that time, they would draw Commodore Perry as an ogre. And so the idea was to reflect the culture through these images, and then also to understand Japanese culture through the lens of the relationship between two countries and two nations. So these kinds of pedagogical possibilities start happening, okay? So we are bringing that into that kind of active learning into game-like experiences. This is in an introductory circuits course that is available on our massive online course, edX, and I'll say more about that. This particular thing also speaks to, we are very big on hands-on, like I said, lab experiences. Now, typically when we think about online courses, massive online courses, we keep thinking it's all about access to content. Now, or if you think about labs, we think about simulated labs, visualization, and visualizations, which are important. But this particular project, this is a very favorite of mine, Professor Jesus de Alamos, this gentleman over here, this is his baby. And one of the things that he created was something called iLab. Now, iLab is about browser-based access to real laboratories. And I want to emphasize that. These are not simulations. These are not visualizations. These are labs, network analyzer equipment. That's a shake table for seismographic measurements. There are chemical reactors. There are labs in multiple countries. So the idea is that you go set parameters and on the actual equipment. So even if you're a remote student, okay, online student, you actually have lab experiences, which are more than just simulation. Now, I'll tell you, so one of the things that, and I like to talk about this a lot because it's so significant for one of the things that we think about is high quality end-to-end experiences online. This is one of the things that makes it possible. So you don't say that it's diminished in any way because you don't have hands-on experiences or practicum. You can actually have these in the online setting. So iLab is not about 5 labs that MIT has. That we have students in Singapore, in Sweden, etc., who access these labs. One of the interesting things, and it speaks to a point that I heard Professor Chandra make about communities of learners. One of the things that happens with an iLab is you have students from different countries who are accessing the same lab who interpret the results and share results and talk about how to do this based on their context. And that's really rich global learning. But to my original point, it's not about 5 labs at MIT. The open architecture, again, openness is not just about open content. It's about open content, open technology, open architecture, open licenses. All that is the sphere, the generous sphere of open. So in this case, the open architecture allows experiments anywhere to be created and plugged into the architecture and students to have access. We were talking about Asha. We were all in China some time ago at the Open Courseware Consortium meeting, and suddenly we had this professor of computer science. She came and she was showing the iLab, and she had downloaded it. And until I saw a picture of iLab, I didn't even know. For the simple harmonic motion experiment, the inverted pendulum, we use the one that has been set up in University of Queensland. So at MIT, we use the lab that is there. So you can have labs set up anywhere. This is implications for training, having browser-based access. The small point I like to make about this iLab is it's not just about expensive equipment that can be shared, expensive experiments that can be shared. It's about the fact that experiments can be done at all. In many cases, in our education, we learn theory. There's a lot of latency between when we learn theory and when we see its application, sometimes not at all. I can tell you most of my science experiments were reverse engineering experiments. I always knew the value of G and worked backwards, right? But there's another thing. When you set up a lab configuration, the amount of time it takes is disproportionately more than its usage. What happens with things like iLab is you can multiplex the configuration among several users. And that really speaks to the economics of providing labs. So it's not just about expensive labs. It's a fact that you can have labs at all. And 2, that once you set up labs, it can be shared amongst large groups of people in different places. We even have K through 12 students in Chicago. We have a benign nuclear plant at MIT, them doing experiments with neutrons. So, and people typically ask, can they see the experiment? Yeah, we set up cameras so that you actually, feel like you're with the experiment. Then the typical question that comes up is, how can you do chemistry wet labs? And I tell people that, nowadays a lot of the chemistry labs, people are not pipetting and using burettes. If you watch CSI, the show, they press buttons, parameters are set, photometric measurements are made. So there's a lot of instrumentation that goes on. So this is not to deprive people of, real kinesthetic experiences or tactile experiences, but to provide those kinds of experiences where it's not possible. So the second thing that you saw was on intellectual commons. And of course, I'm assuming everybody has heard about OpenCourseware. Everybody has heard about OpenCourseware? Some interactive show of hands over here. Okay, so we have OpenCourseware. And then you see that, there's, it was just remarkable seeing the inputs at that time. And now when we look back, we have upwards of 2,000 courses, 2,100 courses, all those videos and assessments and exams and so on. But what is really phenomenal about OpenCourseware was not just at MIT, but you have upwards of 250 institutions who are making their courses available. So 13,000 courses of different kinds, different sizes, speaking to, and I'm sure, in past talks, speaking to the notion of abundance that was talked about, so abundant content. But I point out that it's not just about abundant content. what iLab shows, what OpenCourseWare shows, and what edX particularly shows nowadays is that it's about abundant communities. So suddenly you have all kinds of peer communities, self-learning communities that are formed who become part of the education ecosystem. Right? So the entire onus of education is not in the teacher, one-to-many teacher relationship that we've typically seen, but gets transformed into a many-to-many. And that's both a challenge, but it's quite an opportunity to disregard. So here we come to edX. So 2 years ago, almost now, MIT and Harvard said, look, in 2000, we did not know how to do this. Much technology. So we took pictures and put out OpenCourseWare. Now we know there are affordances in technology. We can look at analytics. We have networks that are in abundance. We know about interactive learning much more. And so edX was launched, and to say, look, how can we provide not just you can see kinds of models like OpenCourseWare, but you can also do. So they launched massive open online courses, and you've heard the progression. I won't go into a treatment of MOOCs, the MOOC-X, the MOOC-Cs. So these are, the original MOOCs were about collaborative communities, participating communities. MOOC-X was more of this interactive broadcast where institutions put up their courses on a platform like edX, like Coursera, and made online courses extensively available. The thing that I'll keep coming back to is that while influencing the world and making education opportunities extensively available was indeed an agenda, we are engaging, and this is where it goes back to my first slide, because we see the opportunities for improving what we do on campus. And that's because that's how these things get sustained. And I will show you some data which look very, very promising. So I've talked about visualizations for deeper learning. So these are some of these things that are being reflected. Talked about Mathlets, which are interactive simulations, and I point to all these because these are becoming part of the edX open online courses. And because one of the things these things offer is the fact that you have a variety of resources that are available to strengthen your learning, to provide different pathways if you don't understand. So you don't have a one-shoe-fits-all model. One of the things that we are doing at MIT is not just bringing visualization and simulations to play, but we have actively started modularizing our courses. And this is a very important part, because if you look at what these platforms are providing, extensive access, you're also suddenly conscious that you really want to be able to mold your curriculum in different ways for different ends. So we undertook some modularity experiments a couple of years ago in chemistry, mechanical engineering, aeroastro, and they were done for different reasons. For instance, in mechanical engineering, we took all the topics, and the idea was that students could have flexibility in how they studied these things without paying a price if they were not always on campus. And you know this very much. We wanted our students to go to Singapore, to go to Cambridge, but our students would go, but they were a little reluctant because they said when they were away, they were disconnected from the campus experience. If you modularize these things and people could take these segments independently, and it has to be intelligently modularized. So I'll say a bit about concept-based modularity. People could take these independently and flexibly and not have to pay a price because they had to engage in these other things which are equally educationally valuable. So, we would want students to go and participate in some robot opera shows or music shows. And we would have actually our students. MIT is a pretty intense place. For instance, these kids would go to a show that they were helping in producing and be sitting up in the rafters and doing their assignments. So they neither got the experience of doing the show well, nor their education well. You modularize, they can do these things element. And I had a very interesting vignette. I was talking with, I was presenting to our visiting committee. Every program at MIT has a visiting committee. And undergraduate education, I was presenting to the visiting committee. And as I was talking about this mechanical engineering course, the teaching assistant of the of the course sent me a note and from one of his students, thanking the TA for having this course in a modular form available because it allowed the student to go take treatment for cancer that he had. So I mentioned this. I said, look, this is very poignant. As I'm talking to you about this, I've got this message, and I mentioned it to the people. In the break, this lady got up she was part of our visiting committee. She came up and said, Vijay, I know exactly the guy you're talking about who benefited from this. This is my daughter's boyfriend. I mean, it was very, very personal, the fact that, you could take on all these courses. So that was one thing. In the chemistry course, it was different motivation. And this is important for the theme of this conference when you're talking about learning and learning gains. In the chemistry course, we said, look, are there common concepts that we can modularize so that downstream learning has more efficacy? Meaning in chemistry, there is notion of buffers, for instance, stable pH. To get out. So if people get that concept well, then downstream courses which refer to that concept, they can learn much better, more efficiently, and so on. And of course, that means that faculty who are in these different courses have to agree on what are the common core concepts to be learned. But there was another reason. Students who took the introductory chemistry course either did that because they want to do an advanced chemistry course, or sometimes they did it because it was on the pre-med track. They actually want to do pre-med. So you took this concept, you had examples that related to biology or those that were appealing to the pre-med students. You had examples that were chemistry. Some people wanted to learn better through looking at actual lab and videos. So we could attach different kinds of assets around these modules, around these conceptual modules, to serve the needs of different kinds of students with different preparations, with different motivations and aspirations. So modularity, had its value. We created ways in which students could actually go tag, based on concepts, video lectures, and so on. So the thing about modularity that I wanted to mention is in some sense, we all already modularize our courses, but it's a very calendar-driven modularity. What we are trying to focus on is really trying to modularize based on core concepts and learning outcomes, because then it allows us to embed assessments very, very closely to these. So if you modularize based on core concepts, instead of typically when we do assessments, a lot of it's much more summative, right? Here, if we modularize based on concepts, we can actually embed assessments around particular concepts, give quick feedback. And one of the things that we're seeing when we do that, the learning gains are quite remarkable. And there's some example. The other thing that when we do concept-based modularity, it allows us to do is to take a particular concept and see how it is being represented in different courses. So there are math concepts, for instance. There are a set of courses where you learn about those concepts. There are a set of courses where you apply those concepts. There are a set of courses where you learn advanced topics, and the student is able to see a coherent whole for the subject. And this is like Bloom's taxonomy, learn, apply, so on. So you can actually see that students can look at this progression in different courses. And believe me, I wish I had some of this when I was doing engineering, because otherwise you always wondered, in the first year, you'd look at, the triple integral, Stokes, and I said, why on earth am I doing this nonsense? If somebody could have shown me that, look, you want to be a rocket scientist, this is where this applies over there. Or the flashback where you say, look, I'm doing this in my third year, I'm doing some fluid mechanics or whatever, and suddenly I can't remember this stuff. I can go to the particular topic in real time and revise it. So that's a flashback. I can see the relevance to what I'm learning now to a topic that was learned before in my early days. So it's these kinds of learning experiences that makes it possible. Of course, we have created an infrastructure, service-based infrastructure called the Core Concept Catalog, so that learning outcomes, concepts, they can be created and mapped to different kinds of learning assets and be available not just for a course, but across courses. So creating the educational infrastructure and the technological infrastructure to facilitate that. Lots of technologies are being created. I will rush through this. Again, remembering first principles. You want it to be active. You want students to engage. So here we have OpenCourseWare. All these PDFs are there. Let's say all of us are on a network, whether it's in this room or across multiple islands. Our students are there. I look at a page and I don't get something on that course page. I annotate it You look at it from elsewhere, you say, I get it, you cross-annotate it. So we are creating collaborative annotation tools. This is something called NB that was created by one of our faculty members to do collaborative annotation on media, also on video. So all these recognize that learning is both interactive and a networked activity, and you want to facilitate that. So these are the kinds of things that have been created. You look at these courses, and this is an introductory computer science course where we create the means so that you can chunk it out. It's a large course, 300, 400 students, and they're online. So you chunk out the code and do a lot of peer review. So you create the technology enablements to do that. So I'm going to move on to this last segment where I say, we're doing all this online, we're creating these technology affordances, but what we are trying to do now is bring this together for the transformative opportunities that we mentioned. And so we said MOOCs are not, why we find MOOCs interesting. Again, this goes back to my talk. It's because all these things that we care about, high bandwidth of interaction, visualization experiences, interactive experiences, we can do it at scale. That was not possible before. We can do it at scale, and there's a variety of reasons. It's not just the network and the technology and the openness that allows for that scale. What allows for the scale is suddenly what I mentioned before, that it's no longer just a one-to-many interaction. When the first course on edX was launched, it was Anant Agarwal, and you'll hear his voice shortly. It was a circuits course, and 3 of the faculty members and 2 TAs, they launched the course. Their assumption, they had 150,000 people who signed up. Their assumption was that there'd be the instructors and 150,000 people, learners out there. Within 1.5 weeks, they found that it was not 3 and 150,000 people. There were communities who were solving each other's problems, and there was a gating mechanism of sending queries up and down, ranking questions. So suddenly, the one-to-many became a many-to-many learning experience. Right? So the whole ecosystem changed. So that was what allowed to do scale, because not in a multiplicative way, but in a vectorially different way, to do scale like that. So that was what was very interesting. And to bring the benefit of that scale, those queries, that data, back into informing the teaching practice on campus. So this interlinking of content, the fact that you could have these embedded assessments, so you could have much more formative assessment rather than summative assessment. And so we were not able to think about an online course as an entirely different pedagogical experience. And yesterday, something that you said, Professor Chandra, struck me. He said, look, this is not just about transformation at the edges. It is looking at the centrality of digital to really change education. It's changing the way we do online, and it is a changing we do on-site, and it is a changing the way we can judiciously combine online and on-site to have some profound changes in education practice. So this is some quick things. So we think edX, we think online course. We say, oh, there's this, it'll be a person, it'll be blast out to 300,000 people, and it's just those video things talking. But it can be those video things interspersed.
Yes, you see this amazing thing happening?
Like this,
and
like
the key is that the stable point is when V plus equals V minus. Okay, it's not exactly equal. Okay, it's more or less equal to each other. Okay, V plus more or less equal to V minus.
So that's Anant Agarwal, who launched edX. He's a professor of computer science at MIT. I like to say sometimes he's from the same IIT that I went to, only junior, but is a accomplished great thing. But the point over here is you have videos, lectures, but you can also immediately have some classroom-like experience. If you don't understand the concept, immediately you can embed a visualization right next to it. This is like for 802, the physics course that I showed you, the Teal course, that's available on edX. So you have a video lecture, you have some exposition, you can have some elaboration of a concept through visualizations, and this is all more of the same like that. And where people actually interact with the content, then you can do some quick testing. So you have some auto-graded exercises, all in time at that place. They're embedded in the lesson. That's what. So you have really factored the educational experience. you're bringing this kind of, so you did the learn through the video, through the whiteboard exercise, you do an apply and a test, you do a quick exercise. So what's happening is you're bringing the various stages in that taxonomy, in the Bloom's taxonomy, much closer to each other. Learn, apply, test. You're bringing them closer to each other, giving them feedback, so what's happening is you're able to bring formative assessment much more frequently into the learning process, and you know, through embedding all this. And you provide game-like experiences where people actually test out, show, and you look at the results, and based on the results, you can actually feed them back to the lessons. So that's the online education experience. It's not talking heads. It is not even the group exercise that you do in classes. It is actually embedding and a different kind of, and that instant feedback matters because people know, people go correct themselves, people go learn, and the fact that they can take this tests, which we used to hate and which is a punitive exercise, as actually a constructive engagement, has really, really helped. And you create fun exercises where people can actually apply, create, in this case, the circuits course. They create their own circuits and test themselves. So when we think about the online course, the edX course, and this is, I'm just showing a range of exercises for different kinds of courses, right? So you have online labs, you have visualizations, you have exercises, you have testing, you have application sandboxes, all of these embedded and in proximity to each other with feedback. And that's what's leading to, and I know I've already talked about embedded assessments, the fact that you can do this formative assessment in a just-in-time way, and which is quite different from how we have in our typical VLEs or in our classrooms. That's the experience that you're providing. And so what it is really driving, and this is an important thing, where we find the mastery of concepts really becomes much more pronounced through this experience. And I want to show you some quick, a real good example of this. This is an introductory chemistry course that was done. It was an edX course. And what the faculty member who did this, and initially he didn't even want to do this. He did not want to take this introductory chemistry course and put it online. Next, and the online course was a success. He wanted to keep the on-site course very separate from the online course. But we sort of talked to him, and he got convinced to try it as an experiment, as a very large substantive experiment. He says, I'll use the videos that are there in edX for lectures. So we had students at MIT, the introductory course, use the videos, use the lectures, as you say, and they also use the assessments that were online. But it was in a proctored setting that they did these tests. Now, one of the things that happens with our introductory courses, so basically what they did was a blend using lots of facets of the online course, and then, but this setting over here. Now, in our introductory courses, these large GIRs, chemistry, physics course, at MIT we have something called the fifth semester flag, where we check, fifth week flag, where we see how people are doing in the fifth week, because otherwise you have to say, look, you need some extra advising, you need some extra coaching. Sometimes it might even mean that you have to change your major or whatever. So in a typical fifth semester, in a chemistry course, you can see in 2011, there were 56 flags. That's typical, this thing. Look at it in 2013 with the blended model, because there were 3 flags based on the performances. That's a significant difference that is happening with that. I wanted to show you this. If you look at it, there are a couple of things you will see over here. These are the various learning outcomes, right? And in the test, and they were all measured to the final exam. So if you look at the performance, the scores in the tests related to these learning outcomes, in 2012, there were, let's say, that many people for atomic structures who scored nearly full marks on that full understanding. Look at that number in 2013. Right? It's incredible the mastery that students are getting just because you're able to give rapid feedback. They can do this test in a proctored way. They're tested out before that. So this is evidence. Right? early days, but this is proof positive. I know my colleague Sanjay Sharma, who heads the Office of Digital Learning, he talked about one of his colleagues, Simona, who's teaching a mechanical engineering course, and she had sent him, Sanjay is a senior professor, and Simona had sent him a test that she was going to give her students and to see how it was. And Sanjay said, look, this is very difficult for first-year students. You know, you're really going to kill them. She didn't tell him. She went and gave the test in this form. They all scored in upwards of 90%. They aced it because of this kind. You know, so you're able to do formative. You're able to provide different kinds of experiences. This is what's showing. So what does this bring? And I'm closing up over here. What does this bring? We've talked about abundance. You've heard a lot about abundance. And the distinction I'd make is this prudent combination of networks and technology and open education, massive online and open, certainly allows for an abundance of learning opportunities, flexible learning opportunities, different pathways. It allows us to blend the outside and the inside, judiciously combine the physical and the virtual, but it brings us access to tremendous amounts of community. And you say that you start leveraging the ecosystem in different kinds of ways. And then, of course, the possibilities for continuous education, the fact that you can do knowledge upgrades. One of the interesting things about open courseware was in our second year or third year, we saw suddenly solid hits on the open courseware page. And we were trying to figure out what happened. Why is the usage spiking like that? Later on, we found out that the spikes were coincident with the dot-com bust in Silicon Valley. So a lot of people at that time without jobs, and they said, let's go use this time to learn stuff and update our skills. So they would go there. So you can start seeing the connections with continuous education. But basically, and this is to close it all, we talk a lot about interactivity, hands-on, proximal learnings. What our faculty were seeing is over the years, we had distanced ourselves from our intent. Okay? Not because we're bad people, because it was just the curriculum was packed. So we could not come back to doing what we really cared for, which is lots of active learning, lots of hands-on learning. Now we are able to do that. So we are able to bring back these kinds of experiences because of the blended learning possibilities, through much more modularity. We're able to engage students much more in research. These are the kinds of motivations that drive us to look at massive and the blended, because it goes back to our first principles, to the core values that we really embrace. So that's where I'm going to sort of. So one last thing. This is because Professor Chandra, abundance. One of the things that we forget is the amount of data we are getting, sensors, and about data. But it's really telling us both in a micro way and a macro way. One of the bigger, there's a big research initiative that MIT and Harvard have launched around around edX with all the partners, because you're learning a lot about how students learn, where are they going, what are the kinds of sites, and that kind of data is will feed into us into design of our own programs. So one of the aspects of abundance is abundant, useful data to do macro institutional planning and micro curriculum planning. So that's a research that is going on over here. So this is what was the Yogi Berra line? The future ain't what it used to be, or something like that. But when I look at this intersection, the profound opportunities that we have, and I see it being played out in different kinds of initiatives. There are things that we're doing with schools, training with community colleges, projects for underserved schools in India and Haiti. The possibilities are really very, very important. For me, and this is something I was saying last night, when I remember in India, once I was interviewed, when I was working with the Knowledge Commission on these possibilities, someone said, oh, Dr. Kumar, does this mean that because of all this efficiency, we can do a 4-year engineering degree in 2 years? And I said, yes, it's possible, but it's also possible that you can now do a 4-year engineering degree in 40 years. You can go, you can come. And that's a possibility that we want. The other thing was this thing that I actually, distance education, we always thought about distance education as a second-class citizen, coming from, saying that it's all those folks who are doing that. And what this is saying is online education, what we used to call distance education, becomes a central modality for delivering quality education to all. That's the real proposition over here. Because look, MIT, we are scrambling. We're saying, look, we have to look at this if we really want to be an excellent institution in today's context. So, so that's the desire, and I think we are well on our path to doing that if we are humble enough to look at the transformation possibility, do the large experiments, and also and remember that some of these are experiments. In education, we often confuse the middle of an innovation with the end, so we have to sort of stay with it. So with that, I will end, and if there are any. I had no notion of the time, but I'm sure I've kept you all long. But I'm happy to take any and all questions.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for a very graphic illustration of what I think the future holds for all of us, and very interesting to see so many of those different things going on at MIT, and really where we are going to end up. And I think it's clear that higher education is changing, and changing very quickly, and we have to get on the train because it's not going to stop. We have time for a few quick questions.
Dr. Kumar, I'm an instructor with the Confucius Institute, and from your speech, I have the impression that students in MIT have a lot of resources to enable them for autonomous learning. Is it true that students expect less and less teacher involvement in their learning process? And my second question is, as learning is evolving, teaching must also be transforming. How can we teachers transform ourselves in order to follow suit, in order to get on the train, so that we won't be left out of this changing education? Thank you.
Thank you. Those are loaded questions. One of the things, before edX was launched and we were looking at online education, undertaking these experiments, we did a lot of focus groups with students. I personally went late night to the dorms and, with a lot of my colleagues. And one of the things, and these are MIT students, they're not technology shy. So one of the things they said to our voice, don't bring any technology that gets between me and my teacher. And it was very interesting. So you can say it as talk and talk because, and the other thing they said was, give it to me in every kind of way that you can. Give it to me through cable TV, give it to them lectures. So they said, we'll want to think along with our teachers, they said. So the intent was not to disintermediate teachers, okay, out of this, because now, that said, there is something, and this might relate to your second question also, is we do think about what does the teacher's role become in this new ecosystem, because the entire onus of transferring education is not with the teacher. You also say, look, there is a community there. There are these other things. You have a much more abundant set of resources at play that you can judiciously bring in to create the learning outcomes if you focus on learning. And those are things, and those are not easy. There is a paper that really influenced me very, very significantly when I was a PhD student. It was done by John Seeley Brown and Richard Burton. These two. John Seeley Brown, many of you might have heard of. He's a very big thinker. He started the Palo Alto Research Center. He's a provocateur at large, very big fan of open education. Also wrote the foreword to our book. But John and Richard Burton, they talked about, and the paper has a long name, and I'll be happy to send references. It's called Increasingly Complex Microworlds, a Theory of Simplification, Debugging, Coaching. What they were essentially saying at that time, it was a very interesting paper because they compared teaching in computing-intensive environments to the teaching of skiing. And they talked about how simplification was possible at the level of equipment, the level of skills, and the environment. For instance, when you're learning skiing, you don't have to go to the Alps to learn balance. You can learn it in the backyard, right? If you have snow like in Boston. Or when you're learning skiing, initially you pick shorter skis than long skis. So equipment, that's a simplification of equipment. But one of the most interesting things about the paper was it talked about the role of teachers. and what teachers become in this computational teaching learning environment. And he'll talk about the role of coaches. So a coach points out constructive experiences. Right? So now if you imagine in today's world, there's this morass of information through the internet. That's available, right? So the faculty member, the teacher, becomes sort of a vetting, a curator also of this, saying of these many, many interesting resources. Here are some useful ones for the learning outcomes that we desire. Okay, but there's many, many communities out there with whom we can engage. There might be some interesting ones, again, for the learning outcomes that we desire. So that that's one of the kinds of shift that starts happening. So the shift is important, but like I said, it's not, our students don't feel the need to disintermediate teachers. And in fact, none of these things that we design. In mathematics, you keep talking about this trivial solution. Anything is divisible by 1. So you don't want to get to that situation. So people keep pointing out what are useful experiences. Our students want that. They do so. My son is at MIT now. So I caught him because I said, I'll go to this large lecture biology class and see him. He was not there. So I said, Suhas, you were not there. He said, yeah, I was in the dorm. But I watched the video, he said. And I said, he says, no, in that class, I do watch the video, but then I go to the recitation section so that I can interact much more deeply with the same instructor. So they figure out what are the right things.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for your nice talk. My name is Shaukat Ali. I'm the Dean for the School of Science and Technology, the University of Fiji. As an academic, my views is learning will never finish until we die. And learning is a two-way process. Student will ask questions, lecturer will reply. Lecturer will ask questions, student will reply. This example I always bring in my class. The MIT and other institute from America, you colleagues are bringing education system completely free in the online. My query is the baby formula is a substitute for babies. It's not an alternative for mother's milk. So how do you value the learning should go through 100% in the online rather than institute, please?
So I might have missed something, but that entire online is not devoid of interaction either with the teachers or with students. If anything, it is much more pronounced and directed than otherwise possible. That's why when I talked about the teal, we make a lot of assumptions about how much interactivity that we have in our classes. And what you're saying is, look, how much of that is constructive interaction, if at all? So when we see online, it is the current nature of that online. I mean, your point is very well taken. The current nature of that online is not disintermediating teachers. It is not devoid of interaction. If anything, it makes it more pronounced. But the one thing it says is that you are not the only one who's interacting in this. I can save my time to. So if you take one of these courses, there are these communities, and they answer each other's questions, and the teacher and the instructor and the TAs, they are watching these answers to make sure that the right answers are given, and then the ones that are not answered are voted up, so that when the faculty member instructs, they make sure that all these questions the TAs have not answered or incorrectly answered are answered, but not to 40 people, but 400,000 people, right? Not through a lecture, but through a YouTube section which says, these are the questions that were asked. And so it is not taking it away from that experience. If anything, it is to amplify and extend that. So if we went into the model that I stood there and just, if it was online, just online, everything is online, then the risk that you're pointing out is very, very real. So when you think about it, again, if you think about this massive online or edX model or the blended model we're talking about, first of all, we're talking about blended model. We think about what are the things that can be automated this way. We could never do assessments with the frequency, with the volume, in a traditional setting. And as you say, formative say, you don't have time, you're a human being. There's not enough time, there's not enough calendar moments to do that. You can automate that assessment. So then there's not enough lectures that you can do around particular topic because human capacity. Right? So we think very accurately about what are the things that we're automating that allows us those things that we can do well to be able to do them, which are not able to do. That's
Professor Kumar, thank you very much. I don't think we've got time for any more formal questions, so I'd like a big round of applause. Thank you very much. And Professor Kumar will be available, I hope, in the tea break to answer some more of the questions that I can see a lot of people have got for him, so we'll be able to do that later. So thank